In our lives, so many of the arguments that we get into are over completely silly, small things. I would be willing to bet that if we all suddenly remembered the smallest, silliest thing that we got into an argument over, we'd become so embarrassed immediately that we'd want a hole in the ground to just open up and swallow us. For the story that we're looking at in this episode, it's about a dispute over a chicken, a supposedly stolen, perhaps eaten chicken that leads to a curse, which is why, as you may have guessed, the name of the story is The Curse. I've got a very interesting and not cursed at all guest to come on and talk with me about this one. It's Jeffrey Kinkley, friend of the pod, I guess. He's a guy I met all the way back when I attended that genre fiction symposium in Leeds before the pandemic, and finally he's come on the show to chat with me. So it's a really nice conversation, and it also brought something a little bit, not full circle, but it picked up a very old thread in the show, because I did an IE novel when I was just getting started. I think before episode 10, maybe just after episode 10, I had an episode on IE's A Perfect Crime, a novel, and this time we're looking at a short story. And the interesting thing was whether or not either of them could be called crime is definitely up in the air. This one, I think The Curse is really not a crime fiction story, but crime pervades it in one way or the other, which is pretty interesting. But I'll leave the discussion of those themes and genre questions to the actual interview, because right now I'm going to take us to the Trucha Fig News, the translated Chinese fiction news. So we got 3 items this time. As is more or less traditional, one of them is about Chinese sci-fi. It's the upcoming London Chinese Sci-Fi Group meeting. So if you're listening to this significantly far into the future, then you're probably too late. The event's happening July 31st, 2022 that is. It's going to be on a short story that you can read on Clark's World. That story is called The Strange Girl, and it's by Xiu Xinyu, and the translator is Emily Jin, former guest on the show. So their event is going to have both the author and the translator on, and it's going to be hosted by, of course, a friend of the pod, Guanzhao. I think if it's not Guanzhao, it'll be another one of the members of the group, who are all excellent. So I'm going to be there for this one, unless something goes dreadfully wrong. I'm looking forward to attending, and if you're going to join in yourself, then I've got a link in the show notes that will take you to their MailChimp page about the event, where you can email them to ask for an invite. If you're still struggling, or if it's not working for you, you can get in touch with me and I'll make sure that you get in as well. They will have events in the future as well, so even if you miss this one, do sign up to their mailing list and you can join in future Zoom gatherings to talk about translated Chinese sci-fi stories. Okay, the next news item, this is not sci-fi. Some of you may be relieved to hear. It's about an anthology of Hong Kong literature that has been announced. So here you're gonna hear me botch some French pronunciations, because this is not a Chinese to English translation. This is Chinese to French translation. I saw this on Twitter, announced by Coraline Jorte. So I told you I'd be butchering some French, and it's a collection of stories that are going to be published by, again, here's some butchered French, Editions Gentaillou. I think that's how you say it. Maybe it's not how you say it. There's all sorts of interesting writers that are going to be in there, including Dorothy Tse, Xi, and other people you may have heard of. I wouldn't try and list them all. But yeah, Hong Kong literature, something I've criminally undercovered on this show. I will get around to it. I guess I'll probably have to do a Hong Kong season like I did a Taiwan season. That could be fun. Although I'd just as much like to do as some kind of genre season, like weird season, sci-fi season 2. God knows there's enough stories out there to do either of those. So yeah, I'm getting self-indulgent, which means I should move us to the next story. The next news story. Before I do, I'll just say there is a link to pre-order that Edition Gentaillou anthology in the show notes if you're interested, or you can just go look on Caroline's Twitter. Okay, next news item. Now this one, whether or not this one is literature and whether or not we say it's about translation, I will leave up to you, but this is too crazy not to give some amplification. So it's a story came to light that a Chinese housewife, and that's literally what she was. She was bored at home because her husband was away at work and she didn't have any friends, or so she said. She was spending years, or over years, she spent lots of time creating kind of a false or alternative Russian history on Wikipedia. I believe this was the Chinese language pages of Wikipedia. And I won't go into the full details. I've linked to a Vice story that covers it, where they've interviewed some of the people that got to the truth, got to the bizarre truth of the matter. So yeah, I won't give you my own analysis of the story because I don't really have one. But it's just interesting to see which parts of Russian history that this lady took an interest in and decided to either modify or there is a verb here I'm not thinking of, but sort of expand and add to, but using her own fiction and then creative ideas weaved in with like real sources, real events to create a bizarre digital parallel alternate history of a neighboring country. She didn't do this for Chinese history, she was doing this for Russian history. Couldn't make it up, could you? That's the end of the translated Chinese fiction news, so we're moving on now to the interview. You'll hear me, past version of me, talking to, I almost said Jeremy, not Jeremy, talking to Jeffrey about Ai's The Curse. So buckle up, grab your chicken, and enjoy. So I have on the show with me Jeffrey Kinkley. Extremely excited to have you here, Jeffrey. Astute listeners of the show might remember the name. I think I've talked a bit about you because we met in person a lifetime ago, I think, in Leeds. And now you're back here on the show. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your connection to Chinese literature?
I was beginning to think about that actually a couple of years ago with help from a friend whose identity will be made clear shortly. I can give you the whole 9 yards. Feel free to cut me off if I go too far astray.
If it turns into 10 yards.
I recall that my introduction to Chinese literature was through a translation, unsurprisingly. It was the Wang Jizhen translation of Hong Lo Meng, Dream of the Red Chamber, which I think he did in 1958. And this, actually, Wang Jizhen, I discovered much later on, was a friend through correspondence, at least, with Shen Songwen. Wang Jizhen came to the U.S. In the 1920s. I think he went to college in Wisconsin and became a professor at Columbia. Maybe he was more or less the predecessor of C.T. Xiao Zhiqing. So, but nobody in those days, of course, knew who Shen Songwen was, although actually he had been quite famous in the 1930s and 40s. People just forgot about him. So anyway, the interesting thing here is, why did I know about this translation? It came from a book report that was done by a young woman I was dating at the time. Here we're getting into the romance genre instead of the crime genre, so bear with me. She and I were each other's first dates. Her heart was stolen away, like all of her female colleagues, by this band from across the pond. I forget what they were called, the Arachnids or the Volkswagens or the Drumsticks or something, Beatles, I think. And it was extremely disheartening. All the girls jumping up and down and screaming and yelling, and nobody had any girlfriends during that year. Anyway, I had the last laugh. I connected with her after 40 years, total non-communication. I was married once before and have a very nice son from that marriage. But 13 years ago, practically, we married. So all's well that ends well.
Wonderful.
So now I would get back into crime fiction, but the next chapter really was a period when there was no crime fiction in China, and there was no post-Mao literature because there was no post-Mao. I began studying Chinese at the University of Chicago, where it was taught as a dead language, a very dead language, deader than a doornail. And actually, it was originally taught by H.G. Creel. We discovered through detective work that his name was Hurley Glessner. Creel, and he was, of course, in on the original digs for oracle bones at Anyang with Li Ji and so forth. Anyway, I got past that. I was actually a geography major in college, which may explain some of my affinity for Shen Songwen, because Shen Songwen wrote so much about local history and that sort of thing.
Mm.
So then it was at Harvard, I started studying Shen Songwen, and I was a member of the world's best seminar. Can you imagine? Every week, 5 professors would get together and speak.
Wow.
Patrick Cannon, Benjamin Schwartz, Ezra Vogel, Yu Yingshi, and Alexander Woodside, who introduced me to Shen Songwen. Cannon recalled, and I think this rings true, it was quite a surprise to me at the time, most American professors in the 60s and 70s, when they were interested in modern Chinese literature, which would be basically either Maoist literature or the May 4th literature before, I met quite a few who said, well, anything written in Baihua, in the vernacular language, was not literature. It had to be written in Wanyan. Only then could it be literature. But those who were interested, they basically followed the Beijing line of the revolutionary leftist writers were the important ones. So Woodside himself, who introduced Shen Songwen, was kind of surprised because the Bibles those days were Wang Yao, the 中国新文学史稿, 是初稿, something like that, and Li Helin and Liu Shousong, those kind of people who were banned in China at the time because of the Cultural Revolution, but Hong Kong booksellers kept those books alive. So anyway, those were great days. My fellow classmates included Perry Link, who was beginning to study his Mandarin ducks and butterflies, and there was Randall Edwards from the Columbia Law School, who went on to direct the East Asian Legal Studies Center there. He was studying Judge Bao, which may have given me some ideas later on. Ezra Vogel was studying Heroes of Shuihu Zhuan, the water margin. So another couple things, Bonnie McDougall taught modern Chinese literature. It was not an esteemed field, even at Harvard. That seminar I was in was called Social History Through Popular Literature. And popular literature in those days, as I say, it didn't mean what it means now. Everything was either mass literature of the Maoist type, or Bonnie had a particular interest in how this interacted with the history of literature back to May 4th and beyond, even to the reform literature of the late Qing and folk literature. So that's something that's always in my mind, thanks to her. And then there was a wonderful conference too in 1974 at Dedham, Massachusetts, with a workshop before at Harvard that led to the founding of the Modern Chinese Literature Newsletter, and then the Modern Chinese Literature Journal of Howard Goldblatt et al. And then today Kirk Denton's Modern Chinese Literature and Culture website, which of course is second only to Paper Republic for authoritiveness on current writing and translations. So I had a great start. Now, as to crime fiction, I can trace my interest in that exactly to 2 books. It was interesting, from 1980. This guy, Sen Ying.
There we go, Jeffrey's, for people listening, Jeffrey's holding up the books for us to see.
Yeah, I should say it right. 中国大陆罪案小说选.
It's got sort of a bars look on it, and this one looks like it's maybe from the same series.
Yeah, 中国大陆侦探小说选. And I don't know who Sen Ying was, but it was a great collection. It came out of nowhere. I asked myself, how, after all these years of suppression, could people in China write, Agatha Christie type puzzle whodunits? Where did it come from? Had they been writing them all the time? But then, on the other hand, there were these crime fiction, which Sen Ying saw as something different, that fed into the critique of the rule of law that had, of course, been such a problem. During the Cultural Revolution, there were no lawyers. The whole profession was basically disestablished. The Ministry of Justice was in abeyance. So I think it was these books that kind of gave me the idea there was a kind of bifurcation in Chinese attitudes toward crime, that on the one hand, you have the traditional puzzle interest, and on the other hand, you have an interest in legal institutions and how they're evolving. And one other book that really influenced me, of course, at that time, Li Yi of Hong Kong, again, had a whole series called 中国新写实主义文艺作品选, a selection of works of China's new literary realism. And I was inspired by that. I think I had, in 1982, the second conference or symposium to have authorized attendance by scholars from both sides of the Taiwan Strait. First one was a Association for Asian Studies panel on the 1911 revolution, Xinhai Geming. And of course, there at the Iowa Writers' Workshop, people had snuck out of Taiwan and met with their mainland counterparts. But St. John's University, where I have had most of my career, I'm retired now, was bought and paid for by the Kuomintang of China. So I had a certain license to invite Taiwan scholars, and it went pretty well. So the theme there was China, whether or not there was new realism in Chinese literature, since on the one hand, Li Yi had inspired us. And of course, we knew about Chinese literature through these intermediaries like Li Yi and others who did the scouting. There wasn't that much comings and goings with China in those days. I was able to go to China in 1980 and again in 1981 and interview Shen Songwan, and he came to the United States. But we relied then, I think we still rely on our Chinese friends to tell us what to read and who are the upcoming writers. And I don't speed read Chinese. I don't know, maybe Nikki Harman or Heather Inwood, a bunch of Chinese people speed read Chinese, but I'm very reliant on these kinds of people. So ever since then, when I finally put out my book in 2000 on what I called Chinese Justice, the Fiction, I went back to the 1930s with Cheng Xiaoqing and Sun Liaohong, who had written good puzzle kind of stories in the 30s. But my emphasis was the 1980s. And another person who helped me a lot was Rudolf Wagner, who unfortunately is deceased now. He really helped found the Anglophone studies of Chinese science fiction, going back to the 1950s. It was revived in the 1980s. As he pointed out, a lot of it was written by scientists, and he viewed it as a kind of lobby literature. So he asked me, how much of this crime fiction is written by police officers?
Right.
And that was an interesting thing, because just a few years later, 1984, it was the Ministry of Public Security that put out the flagship magazine, 啄木鸟, the woodpecker. It pecks out crime and bad people.
That is a good name.
Yeah, and the police had all sorts of workshops where policemen could come and write up cases they had been involved in. I don't think you could do that here in the UK or US. you'd get sued immediately. But they transformed them into short stories. And I was going to go to China to interview authors in 1989 summer, and certain events intervened. But after the massacre, I was allowed already in November to go to China. It was a very interesting time. I went around interviewing crime authors, and probably one of my first questions, do you work for the police? They probably thought I worked for the CIA or something, asking questions like that.
Spy versus spy.
Right. It was a necessary question. And a lot of my help was that there were exiles from China, including people from the Ministry of Public Security, particularly a lady, Helen Wong, not the Helen Wong that we know from public, who's made so many contributions in translation, but she was the partner of Gu Hua, the Hunanese author of Fu Rong Zhen, a town called Hibiscus, as Gladys Young translated. She gave me lots of tips, people who to interview and so forth. So I did that. And since then, of course, I've gone on to some other genres like historical fiction. And actually, I was going to write a sequel on because I had so much left over about Chinese crime fiction. But a lady in Beijing who was sending me magazines, popular Chinese literary publications, suddenly sent me this book, Heaven's Wrath, 10 New, by Chen Fang. It was one of the fundamental books, although it was quickly banned in China, of anti-corruption fiction. So I turned to that for a while. So that's kind of how I got into Chinese crime fiction.
Mm-hmm. And I can say I've read one of your books. I was reminded of this because Facebook did that thing where it tells you what you were posting about a year ago. And I was posting about having started your book, which talks about Heaven's Wrath, I believe, and some of the other corruption novels out there. So I guess that wasn't your early works. I was jumping in midway or halfway through, but it was an interesting read because, just from my perspective, someone who's only reading the translations, but is also really interested in sorts of outlier books that come through into English that don't fit patterns of the books we normally see on bookshelves, is just very, very illuminating. Seeing what people were reading, maybe not right now in China, but back then in a different time. But the other thing about it that interested me is that it's how can I phrase this? I'm always say that I'm on team genre fiction rather than team literary fiction. Of course, I wouldn't really want to pick one, but if I did, I would pick genre fiction. But when you say genre fiction, in my mind, and maybe in readers like me, we think of speculative fiction, so sci-fi, horror, fantasy, which are definitely interlinked, but they really are quite at odds with probably the two other big commercial genres, which would be, at least in the West, crime and thrillers and romance. I believe romance is the biggest one in most of the Anglophone world, with the exception of the UK. We must be a little bit darker minded because we're a little bit more into crime and thrillers than romance. But yeah, the thing that makes crime and thrillers, maybe more so crime, stand out to me is that it is, I suppose you could debate how much, but it's a realist genre, or it has a foot in the realist sort of camp in a way that romance doesn't. I suppose romance might, but it's not the gritty realism. It would be more mundane realism. But definitely spec fic and realism aren't really friends. That kind of would be self-defeating if they were. But yeah, it's interesting because realism as a genre leads you into all sorts of interesting political questions, and I guess that's pretty obvious in your body of work, whether it's policing, ideas about justice, or corruption and how it's thought about and talked about in Chinese lit. And it would be great to do a whole episode on some corruption fiction. There is at least one book in translation in that genre. It's In the Name of the People, which is, I guess, again, that's a bit of an outlier because that's a resurrection of the genre. But again, I'd love to talk about that forever, but we should focus on our chosen story and our chosen author. That's IE's The Curse. Actually, no, that's nonsense. My next question is, what does the crime thriller genre look like inside China? So I'll say again, our story for the episode is The Curse. That's by IE. It is definitely, well, we could debate. It is nominally a crime story, definitely with a heavy dose of realism. I'll try and argue it has some darker speculative elements as well. That is our story. But before I get to the story, I want to just ask you, Jeffrey, how do you describe what the crime and thriller genre scene looks like inside China today, but also maybe what brought it to where it is today?
It would take a lot of chutzpah, if I may borrow the term from the magazine, of which I think IE was a founder, along with Oning, in, I think, 2011. I really don't have a grasp of all of it. There's this new book by Megan Walsh called The Subplot. She, in fact, mentions In the Name of the People, which was a big TV show in 2017, as well as a novel by Zhou Meisun. And I can only give a halfway impression. My impression is that current crime writing in China tends to have psychopaths, dismembered corpses, forensic medical examinations, profiling. Lei Mi is an important author there, of people with really weird psychological makeups. And this has some overlap with Ai, but I don't consider him a crime writer. Actually, his book, A Perfect Crime, it was the publisher who, for the English edition, I assume, gave it the title that made it into genre fiction.
Right.
Because I think originally it was
cat and mouse, Mao He Lao Shu, I think is.
Yeah,
I think it might have had.
Took from, I think, the movie version, but not the book version of the Anthony Burgess Clockwork Orange. 上面我该干些什么?
Yeah.
Which I guess actually from the Chinese could be translated as "What the heck should I do next?" I don't know.
That's right. Yeah.
What voice it is. So anyway, that book is more about crime fiction. Immediately, I recognized Meursault from L'Étranger, and he has admitted that there is a connection there. But obviously, it's a completely different existentialist work. But the question is, everything to the hero too. You just don't know what's going to happen next. So anyway, the interesting thing about crime fiction now, In the Name of the People was a bestseller and has been for several years, I think. But it's about the only Chinese authored ones. 活着 by Yu Hua, which is not really a crime fiction thing, is another bestseller. But for crime fiction, the favorite author in recent years, running away, has been Higashino Keigo. I forget what the Chinese characters are. Keigo Higashino, in the way that Anglophone publishers put it. He writes detective fiction. In fact, that I thought quite excellent book that was on one of your podcasts that Michel Dieter translated.
The Untouched Crime.
The Untouched Crime. Right.
Yeah.
That strikes me as very much influenced by Higashino, and some people even accused it of plagiarism, which I think is totally unfair. But it has the same thing of a person skilled in forensic and interrogation techniques, advising people he knows have committed a crime to help them get out of it. And again, there's the idea of profiling and all this sort of thing, which she dealt with very well in her translation. So this is, I think, crime fiction is not very important in China. It doesn't have prizes, for instance. That's one of the indications. And it, can't compare with science fiction. So, actually, Liu Cixin's all three volumes of what I refer to as his three-body trilogy are bestsellers, have been for some time, right up there on the lists. And the science fiction is genre. I mean, it's obviously genre fiction, but it's sort of on the way to serious fiction too, because it's an avenue by which you can criticize the present by pretending to criticize the future, pretending to imagine the future. There are other genres, like historical fiction, which, in our view, is popular fiction. I mean, you think of, actually, Ken Gelder, who wrote about some of these things, I think traces it back to Sir Walter Scott and James Fenimore Cooper, Kenneth Roberts, Leon Uris, Clavel, those kind of people. So, but the ones in China that I was interested in were actually high literature. People by Gefei Li Rui, Su Tong, Mo Yan. They've written historical fiction, which is not genre fiction. So, i.e., I would say his work probably would not be called crime fiction. There's a big debate in crime fiction studies about what crime fiction is, whether it's high, whether it's low, that sort of thing. One of the major journals now, a new journal, is Crime Fiction Studies, published at the University of Edinburgh this last couple of years, I think. So crime fiction in China probably is not a going thing. It must compete with all these online fantasy genres that Megan Walsh and other people talk about. It's a crazy scene, and I don't really have command of it, I have to admit.
Right. It is worth mentioning, I guess it would be, if I have a job here, is to talk about how these books perform in English translation. And it's definitely notable that a reasonable slice of Chinese fiction that makes it translated into English is crime. Maybe not. Maybe not a huge fraction taken against the whole, but if you kind of set aside everything which is more sort of literary or highbrow fiction from the stuff that is more clearly in genres, crime is pretty well represented. It's probably increasingly outnumbered by sci-fi, but at least in print form, it's ahead of translated wuxia, because that mostly lives online, I think. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good intro. We can move on to introduce.
In fact, Zhou Haohui had this, I forget the title of it now. It was highly promoted in the US and UK, but I went to get a copy of it in China, in Shanghai of all places. People had not heard of it. I had great difficulty. Finally, sort of a Peitung, who was with me when I was at a conference at Shanghai International Studies University of all places, they finally located a copy. It was not easy. So there is definitely a devoted niche readership, but right. I think our audiences are much more interested in it than most Chinese. But again, what's going on online, I really can't tell.
Right, yeah. Zhou Haohui was the guy whose book Death Notice we did on the show.
Death Notice, yeah.
And yeah, I kind of wondered. I remember seeing that I think he started off online and then made it big enough there that he moved into print, and he's had Death Notice is part of a whole series. I think the sequel did come out in English. I guess that's a probably longer series in the original language publication, and there has been, I think, one or maybe even two film or TV adaptations. So I wonder if perhaps some of these things they begin in web or print and then travel a bit more on TV, on streaming services or channels or whatever. Again, I wouldn't know, just speculating.
Yeah, Xi Jinping's anti-corruption initiatives in the later 2010s, I think, were important in the flourishing of the In the Name of the People book and TV show. Beforehand, I'm not sure something like that could have been distributed so widely.
Yeah. In your book, I'm ashamed to admit whose name is escaping me, the one that I read, I was really interested to see that Zhou Meisen is probably I don't know if this is right, but like the most active part of his literary career, where he was maybe seeing most publication and the most reading, was back in the 80s or 90s. And then the occasion of Xi's anti-corruption drive kind of just brought him back in his previous form.
Yeah. Hey, I was going to have a chapter on him in my anti-corruption book. He was very active in the late 90s, beginning of the 21st century. But I thought, well, he's a little too derivative for my taste. So, but he has had a revival. There was someone at the University of Toronto who wrote a book on film and TV adaptations of crime fiction. She, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, I think, came to the same conclusion that there was a party congress around 2002 that kind of shut down everything. I remember when I was in China at the turn of the 21st century, there were whole sections of bookstores, even Xinhua bookstores, that were devoted to fanfubai tizai xiaohuo, anti-corruption fiction. But presumably those were all closed down as the years went down, until Xi Jinping revived it. But again, I have not spent enough time in China to really give an authoritative evaluation of it.
Yeah, I was there when the TV show In the Name of the People came out, and as far as I could gather, the name of the show carried some currency, but I didn't hear anyone talking about the book. But then again, wasn't talking to that many people about books in the first place. The one that always carried currency was Three Body Santi, the Three Body Problem. People always knew the title at the very least, and they usually had something to say. Even if they hadn't read it, they might have something to say about it.
President Obama read it, all 3 volumes, while he was president.
That might have been why he looked so demoralized by the end of quite demoralizing books.
He was ready for what would come afterwards, maybe. He had certain premonitions.
Right, yeah. Okay, we should get to IE now.
Okay, we should.
So for listeners who didn't listen to my very early episode on IE, let's introduce him again. I think you hit on a very interesting line when you mentioned that A Perfect Crime, his one book you can get, no, not his one book you can get in translation, but the one book of his you can get in English translation I've done on the show. You mentioned that it reminded you a lot of The Stranger, or The Outsider, as it's sometimes known,
Right.
L'Étranger by Camus. And that is, I think if someone said, recommend me an existential novel, that's the first one most people would say. It's like the existential novel. It's pretty short, it's relatively fast paced, and it offers you no comfort. It's a pretty bleak picture that doesn't stop to explain itself. And everything I've read by IE, which I think is just, everything I've read by IE, no, I've read three things. I've read A Perfect Crime, I've read this short story, The Curse, and I read his A Match Held to the Flame, which was a little sort of blog post he wrote, or some small piece of, like a Sanwen, maybe, I'm not sure, translated by Dylan Levi King, posted on Paper Republic. And it was just sort of his thoughts on, I forget if he was writing during lockdown in China or if it was after the fact and COVID was coming for all of us, but it was his thoughts on like the life in lockdown. It was an interesting perspective because it wasn't that bleak. It was a little bit more hopeful, but it had that same sort of IE dark perspective. So that's the stuff of his I've read, and the grim existentialism you might say is more of a focus than the crime. But yeah, that's what I would say off the cuff. How would you characterize IE?
Well, I'm really looking forward to a new translation. I think it's coming out in a couple months from Nicky Harman. In fact, it's one of his novels, Wake Me Up When It's 9 a.m., something like that. And I haven't seen it yet. I just seeing secondhand descriptions of it. I think it may have sort of a Faulknerian as I lay dying sort of thing, with different narrative voices. But really, I'm just speculating. There is one other book, as a matter of fact, I have read a few stories. It's called Two Lives by IE.
Yes.
And this is translated by Alex Woodend.
Yep.
Again, it's a very hopeless book. If I can even narrate the plots of a couple of stories if you want me to, but they're even more hopeless than this, The Curse. And yeah, they're also hard to understand. There are some Chinese versions available online, unauthorized, I imagine. In fact, I found a couple slightly different versions of The Curse in Chinese. Definitely, I would not call him a crime author, but we can get into that. Maybe we should talk about The Curse. Then we can talk about this because evidently IE had some severe health problems. At one point, he had an immunodeficiency disease that attacked his lungs.
Gosh.
And I'm not sure. It's hard to get a timeline. And again, I'd have to have lots of chutzpah to even talk about IE because he's written a lot of things.
Right.
Just looking at what's available, probably unauthorized online. And I don't know. I did meet him once very briefly in 2015 when he came to New York. And he looked all right then. And he has been seen online. There was some EU, in other words, European Union, China Literature Fest. There was a YouTube video of him from 2020 when he was talking. So he was reading Proust. However, you temps perdu, all that sort of stuff.
When in Rome.
He was writing a long novel. I have no idea what will come out of that.
Good for him. I guess it might be worth mentioning his professional background before he went full-time writer. If I remember correctly, he was a cop in Jiangxi. I don't remember much more than that. I don't remember if he gave reasons for why he left or what he thought about it, but Jiangxi is not one of the wealthiest provinces in China, and I think that is worth.
Here I can come in as your geographer. He was from Ruichang, which is a little place. I guess he was in a rural area, and it's just south of the Yangtze River. It's in Jiangnan. It really isn't that far
It's
away from
not.
things, but evidently there are mountains, and many of his characters are mountain things. As Michel Dieter and some of the others said, many of these works published in China, when they write about crime, they have to disguise or make anonymous the area where it is. But Ai sometimes tells you that it isn't Jiangxi. He has a special license to talk about Jiangxi, evidently.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. Again, for listeners that didn't listen to that one with Michelle, in English translations, you'll sometimes see a story, let's say a story that is set in, okay, I'm going to name one, Suzhou.
I can name it. Qiu Xiaolong, writing in English
Right.
on Shanghai. When that was translated into Chinese, he had to call it H City.
H City, right.
I don't know whether that's because of who, like
Oh, yeah.
or maybe it's from Haishang. That's the old literary word, Haishang Hua and all that sort of thing. Anyway, he had to disguise street names and all that sort of thing.
Oh, right. Like L Street, Z Street. Oh, damn. So where we, yeah, so we mentioned he was a cop. He was in Jiangxi. I was wondering, in my mind, I don't fit him in any group of writers. I sit him on his own as a lone wolf. Is that more or less right? Like, does he fit in any sort of groupings that you might know of?
Well, not that I know of. As I say, he had this relationship with Oning, with his magazine Chutzpah. That I think was 2011. I think the first publication of the English translation by Julia Lovell, is that how you pronounce her name, was in 2011 at the inaugural issue of Chutzpah. And I don't know about the original Chinese, probably from about that time. And that was a journal, a literary journal, some of whose stories have been translated by the Oklahoma University Press in Norman, Oklahoma, of all things, which is the center of world literature. It's where world literature today used to be, or still is, published, and Chinese literature. Oning was very, very interested in rural problems. In fact, I saw a YouTube video. He said the countryside has been hollowed out. And we see these themes, as in The Curse, where the young folk all immigrate to the cities, the girls work in factories, the boys work in construction, all that sort of thing. Parents don't get to see them. Kids are raised by the grandparents. A lot of this was enacted, decades ago in Japan. But Japan has pretty well. But of course, in China, the distances between the countryside and the city are much greater. And so Oning, it's kind of interesting. Oning was a literary and media entrepreneur and impresario. He did a couple of films, and he was particularly interested in sort of utopian villages. There was one in Guangzhou, I guess it's Sanyuanli, which I believe has a very famous anti-British museum. There was an incident. I bet Julia Lovell has written all about that. She's written this wonderful book about the Opium War. In fact, I think the incident there that was taken as a great patriotic Chinese reprise within the Opium War was that some soldiers were foraging, maybe for chickens, and the Chinese beat them. So anyway, in the latter-day version, the people from what was originally a rural community that had been, I guess, surrounded by city, maintained their old organic rural community. They were growing chickens on rooftops and things like that. And so that was sort of a commune, and it was a subject of a film, which I have never seen, so I really shouldn't mouth off about it. But there was an even more famous sort of anarchist utopian commune at Bishan, which I guess is at the foot of Mount Huangshan. This is a very good place for utopia, I think. But that was very controversial because it attracted tourism. Oning, in his view, I think he's in New York now, had always embraced commercialism as a necessary support of reform and so forth. But there were lots of controversies over the Bishan commune. And of course, there's a long history of anarchist communes, goes back to Zhou Zuoren and his interest in Tolstoyan utopian villages like Mushikoji no Sannyatsu back in Japan. And Chujumo had some kind of utopian thing in Zhejiang with Leonard Elmhurst. And of course, there were all sorts of reconstruction things going on. But this was kind of interesting. So it was evidently for commercial reasons that Chutzpah shut down in 2014. But Oklahoma has kind of preserved some of the stories in English translation, and it looked like a very good book. So that's one of the many things I want to read. But yeah, this interest in rural change that Ai got from his stint as a policeman, probably dealing with the very dark side of society, seems to have influenced all of his work.
I'll add one little coda to what you were saying about Bishan and Oning. If listeners want to get a very quick, literally visual look at what Oning gets up to, he is on Instagram, and it's a public account, so you can see some of the photos from some of the villages and things that he gets up to, and it does all have like a sort of rural utopian vibe. And the feeling I always got looking at his photos was that he's looking for some kind of either alternatives or old ways that are not overtly political. But of course, in China, that's a good way to keep these things going, is don't make them overtly political, keep them small.
In fact, I think Oning now is part of Francis Wakeman and Sarah Dobbs' stable. I think he's an editor for this Writing Chinese magazine they've founded recently. It looks very good.
Yeah. I'm going to pop a link to, I've just Googled Oning Bishan, and there's quite a few different articles that are up there with lots of interesting photos. So I'll pop one of those in the show notes for listeners whose ears have pricked up. I'm going to take us back, though, to The Curse. I thought we could talk about the plot.
Yeah.
Funny that you mentioned chicken thieves, real or imagined, because that's kind of where the action kicks off in this story. We have a lady going by the name of Zhong Yonglian, and we're told that she's deduced that her neighbor Wu Haiying, another lady, was responsible for the disappearance. I'll do what I usually try to do. I'll try and go through the plot in broad strokes, and if you feel I've missed anything crucial, then we can fill it in. Does that suit you?
Yeah, I took a few notes on it. Do you want me?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you'd rather do it. I can do it pretty fast.
Okay, well, I'll give the really broad version, then we can go through your notes. So one lady accuses the other of stealing her chicken. They have a scuffle. Our protagonist, Zhong Yonglian, loses the scuffle pretty badly. So she gets revenge by cursing Wu Haiying. And I think the curse amounts to, if you did steal my chicken, then your son will die. And that's that both women have sort of wayward sons who've left this rural village. Wu Haiying, the accused woman's son, comes back, and he's made it rich. He's got bling. He's got a girlfriend. The cops come in to get him. He has to do a runner, but ultimately he does get away. Then our protagonist, Zhong Yonglian's son, comes back, and he just doesn't seem to care about anything. Well, we've been told doesn't care about anything, and he's especially distant this time. I think he has one little heartfelt half moment, and then then he passes away, and we learn that he's wrecked his body working in some toxic industrial site. And I guess the story ends with the two women finding some common ground and staring out like old socialist patriotic statues while Beyonce plays in the background. That's sort of it.
That's weird.
It's a powerful ending, I think, but it's a strange kind of power.
Well, what did you make of the Beyonce song?
I just wondered if that's what IE had been listening to lately. I think I'd be more qualified to answer your question if I'd ever listened to that song all the way through, but it's just one of those ones that played in the background or played on TV or on the radio, and I wouldn't pay attention because I'm a snob.
Every rule I had you breaking, it's the risk that I'm taking. I ain't never gonna shut you out. Everywhere I'm looking now, I'm surrounded by your embrace. Baby, I can see your halo. You know you're my saving grace. You're everything I need and more. It's written all over your face. Baby, I can feel
I looked up that song on, the internet, and evidently it's a song that Beyonce or somebody else wrote for her. She may have made some additions to it, and it was a love song about her love of, I guess there's a rapper, Jay-Z.
Oh yeah, they're a couple.
It's a complete love song. So Halo, she imagines him as this godlike person that has a halo and how he transformed her life. And it's really, it's not at all dark.
Yeah, it's very very cheesy almost
Yeah,
for a guy like IE.
kind of interesting. There was one more paragraph. There were a couple paragraphs that I noticed differed in the two different editions. One, there's this dramatic scene where the son of the Wu clan escapes. Then he comes back to the Wu house, and the police come again. A three-person posse: a policeman, his driver, and somebody from the local militia who has a Stalin mustache, like the Russian leader. And so then it says that basically somehow it's cleared up because the Wu clan had connections in the provincial government. And they got it all hushed up. Now, in one version, that has been deleted, that aspect indicating corruption. But the other thing that kind of intrigued me was in the edition, which actually is printed in the Chinese edition on the Leeds website, there is one more paragraph. So it's talking about these two women who kind of, I guess they reconcile, and they sit there like stones. And then evidently in a shift of voice into the voice of the narrator, it says, I, the author, was that rural policeman, one of that posse of three, who told people to just calm down, when the Wu clan were surrounding the three law enforcement officers. And he says, that the way you know that it actually must be IE, he continues and says, after that, I resigned as a cop, and I went all over the place. I went over to the different, prefectures and so forth, looking for work everywhere. Then comes up with a very mysterious line, looking for a really special or supernatural woman. I don't know really what that has to do with anything. But anyway, this seems to indicate, this is sort of a confession that this is a case that IE in his previous life as a rural policeman encountered. And most of his stories seem to be formed in that way. In another edition of this story, it said he thanks somebody called Yang with coming up with the details of it. And the original title of this book, of this story in Chinese, is Yangcun Shema, Yang village. So presumably he's one of the Yang villagers that came up with this story. So this, I think, is the link to law enforcement, and that IE once was a policeman. A lot of his stories come up with what seem like bizarre crime cases that he might have encountered or heard about. I know, for instance, Liu Zhenyun, there are a lot of his stories now that are translated. Like the recent one for Cambridge Press is called Strange Bedfellows. And that was translated by Goldblatt and his wife, Sylvia Legion Lee, who was once my student at St. John's in the MA program. She was already very good in translation long before that. But anyway, Liu Zhenyun takes stuff from the newspapers. Evidently, a lot of Chinese writers just find bizarre stories in newspapers and they make them into fiction. But here, IE probably is stringing together interesting anecdotes that he's heard about as a policeman.
Now, you asked me in our prior discussions over Facebook Messenger, what did I think of this bizarre excised final paragraph, especially the phrase about the supernatural woman. So,
yeah,
诸位看一眼超自然的女人. And my first thought was, okay, maybe something's lost in translation. Chao Ziran, like supernatural? Does that mean something different in the original Chinese? And I figured probably not. Like I used Google Translate to break down. I guess I knew Chao. Chao is like super. I think that's pretty straight translation. Ziran, nature. So it's just super nature. So okay, I don't know. Would you agree that there's not anything especially different in those Chinese and English terms?
I really have no idea or what to make of it, and I don't know who this woman would be unless it's a figment of his imagination or how it relates to the story.
Okay, so that's my my thoughts as far as like literal meaning goes. But if I could try and make it weird, or more abstract, I think I can say something.
Oh, that would be challenging. Go ahead.
Okay, right. Okay, so I'm going to bring up.
Weirder.
Yes. I'm going to bring up the English translation. So I think the final like few paragraphs, I think he's trying to do something kind of transcendent. So these are the final paragraphs. I don't need your help. She made her way over to her neighbor's house, ever so slowly, as if she were convalescing from an illness. Seeing Zhong Yonglian sit carefully down on her stone threshold, Wu Haiying brought a stool for her to sit on. The ground's too cold to sit on. I was wrong about the chicken. Shush now. Wu Haiying squatted down and stroked Zhong Yonglian's hand. The tears ran silently down Wu's face, while Zhong stared stolidly into the middle distance, like one of those socialist realist statues of the revolutionary martyrs. A migrant laborer who hadn't yet left for the South was playing an American pop song in one of the houses near the mouth of the village. And then it quotes some lyrics. Everywhere I'm looking now, I'm surrounded by your embrace. Baby, I can see your halo. You know you're my saving grace. You're everything I need and more. It's written all over your face. Baby, I can feel your halo. Pray it won't fade away. They sat there listening.
I think you've solved it. Yes.
Yeah. How have I solved it?
That's the woman. That's the supernatural woman with a halo. Maybe she is the one that he's looking for.
Yeah. So like, although the mysterious paragraph is excised from this, that would be the next one. So I guess I'll read Google's translation of that as well to close it off. They listened. Google did a good job, I think. They listened blankly like stones. As the author, I was the country policeman who shouted, "Calm down." I later resigned from the police position and traveled across the state. I like how it's used the word state. Makes it kind of American. Yeah. Traveled across the province, working everywhere just to catch a glimpse of a supernatural woman. I was going to say my other thought about literal translation is, so it says Chao Ziran the Nuren. Nuren being Chinese, we don't know if it's singular or plural, right? So could it be woman rather than woman? What do you think to that one?
Could be. It doesn't have a
number. It doesn't say Iga Nuren, just Nuren. Yeah, so there's that. But my big abstract point would be, he's trying to do something transcendent here that takes us out above or beyond or outside of the normal realism. And there's a few, if we're doing close reading, maybe there's a few clues. So one is the halo, and the fact it's music, because music is something that by its nature, it creates an effect in you that is never a logical effect. And it can often be sort of transcendent. And I think Beyonce's voice, I'm not a huge Beyonce fan, but like I know the chorus of this song and it is quite touching. But I think it's interesting as well that it comes from a migrant laborer, so almost the lowest of the low in Chinese society, and it's coming from like must be their speaker or maybe even their smartphone, and it's not even named. It just says an American pop song, and it reminds me of a quote from sci-fi author Philip K. Dick, PKD. I forget if it's in one of his non-fiction writings or if it's in his books, maybe Valis. He says the symbols of the divine show up always first in the trash stratum, I think is what he says. And I think it's kind of true. You don't need an opera to pluck out some operatic, socialist, realist, universal imagery. A Beyonce song will do just fine. In fact, it's better because it's more proletarian. Beyonce is not the music of the elites. It's the music of normies or even the downtrodden.
She's pretty rich now, though.
Oh yeah, she's not one of the downtrodden. No, not at all.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's populism for you. You don't need to be one of the downtrodden to be the leader. And I think the other thing that is transcendent is the resurrection of like old school socialist imagery, the statues, because we're told first that they're like statues, and then we're told they're blank like stones. So they're becoming symbols. They're fizzling away as, or solidifying from being these fleshy, mortal individuals into a frozen image. And I think like the way because there's so much action in the story, things never stop happening. But right at the end, these two characters, all their anger fizzles away. They sit down and then they stop moving and music plays. And it's a very strange, peaceful image. So I kind of think, yeah, he's completely changing the tone quite quickly and quite subtly. And it's like a trick because you don't even know what's happened. But I think reading it, the image of the two of them comforting each other, staring out into the distance. And I've walked past a lot of these statues in China, and the thing about them is, although they do have these epic features, they're always workers, or well, no, they're not always workers. They're often soldiers, or if they're workers, they're standing sort of Soviet style, looking powerful. But these women, I think, are a more realistic picture of the working class. They're dead tired, they're exhausted, and they don't know what's going on, which I think that's realism. That's, I guess you could say that's realism with socialist characteristics rather than socialist realism, which isn't a particularly realistic style of art, if you know what I mean. So that's my attempt at a mega brain interpretation.
That is interesting. It does go from themes of revenge and petty dislike of each other to a sort of reconciliation at the very end. In fact, I saw one online interpretation that said it reminded the reader of Lu Xun's famous story, Medicine Yao, where the two mothers from completely different, whose dead kids must have come from different walks of life. One is a revolutionary who provided the blood for the, we would say, superstitious cure of putting a manto or baozi or something in blood of a martyr. And then the other one was the mother of a sick kid who wanted that cure. So they come together at the grave at the very end. And this kind of reconciliation theme, I'm not sure whether it's very abstract in Lu Xun, but here it clearly there is some kind of reconciliation, except that you can read everything two ways. When the lady who delivered the curse, Zhong Yonglian, says, I shouldn't have talked about the chicken. Maybe she's blaming herself. She said, I just shouldn't have done it. Or maybe he's making up with the other person. You don't really know whether, or you don't know what the author's attitude is toward the whole curse business.
Yeah. And I was actually thinking you could flip it. So the reading I gave painted IE as a guy trying to do something that made these guys look like, I don't know, 21st century depressed socialist heroes. But you could just as easily say he's comparing them to statues as an ironic move to show you how those dreams didn't really cash out too much for the rural people of China. Maybe they did a little bit more successfully for urbanites, but we're clearly very far from the city here. And that is a less weird reading. It might be more in line with IE's pessimism, but the reason I'm kind of inclined to think he's not adverse to doing something that shoots us away from realism is there's a bit in the story where he's turned in a dream. There's a dream sequence, not a dream sequence, a dream scene where if anyone's read any Lovecraft stories that involve tentacled sea monsters rising from the depths, you might feel a bell ringing, because there's a description of this dream Zhong Yonglian is having on the night her son has returned, where he's let me just do a Control F and type in squid. Yeah, okay, so there's a bit here. I'll just read the paragraph. Exhausted by sleepless nights, one day she dozed off in a chair. She dreamed that Guofeng, that's her son, was a little boy again, but his face was bleached white, his voice barely a whisper. She ladled him out some porridge, stirred in some medicine, and told him to eat it up. but Guofeng just stared at her wretchedly, shaking his head. Anxiety clutched at her heart. After she put the bowl away, she discovered that a vast squid-colored creature was sprawled over the bed. There goes a train. I've lost my place. Yes, sprawled over the bed, its emaciated chest inlaid with fibrous tendons and bones, its limbs like flayed rabbit legs. Some of its heaving internal organs had been punctured and dark blood was dripping down onto the floor. Now it was half squatting, its right hand flat against the bedboard, its bowed legs buckling as it tried to lever its exhausted body up, while the cotton coat covering it slid off. Its enormous cobble-shaped head was almost hairless and featureless, except for a vast, panting, stinking mouth armed with long, sharp teeth. As it struggled for breath, its cheeks inflated, then deflated. Swaying as if it were about to fall, the creature suddenly reached out to grab her. She woke up. There was a cold ache to her wrist. So if I was trying to downplay this, I'd say, well, he's just picked a very nice metaphor that shows you that she's afraid of her son, but he's also dying. I guess it's foreshadowing because we don't know he's dying yet.
Oh, sure.
But my inner spec fic fanatic says, well, he's picked one of the animal from weird fiction, the squid, the octopus, an inherently creepy, weird animal. He didn't have to do that. It can't be an accident. And then later, when we learn he's dead, we're told his insides have essentially dissolved. He's gone from being a living, seemingly just tired person to a person whose insides, I don't know, almost like he's been replaced by some melting wax object. And I don't know, it's so out there. I kind of feel that if he can do this, he'll do anything, and he'll probably try and sneak it past you before you even realize he's done it.
Yes, I saw two possible interpretations that we can't quite reconcile as to why the son of the woman who delivered the curse, Zhong, died. Why did he die? Was it because of the curse? And the curse was enacted because it was spoken, and therefore through some supernatural means it was enacted. His death was very strange. He came back from the south all exhausted. He lay down in bed after having some soup or something that his mother gave him, and then suddenly he dies. His flesh basically rots away, which doesn't make enough sense. It's not realistic, certainly. That kind of suggests the supernatural interpretation of why he died. But then, what is it, later on, a legal aid intern shows up and said, oh, he died due to the toxins that he must have ingested or smelled there at the factory down near Guangzhou. And there's a natural cause for it. And it becomes an element of social criticism. Certainly we know there are inhumane working conditions down there. So there are two, I see kind of two alternate explanations for why he died.
Yeah, and it's, again, interesting. A thing I spotted this time that I didn't jump out at me so much first time I read this story was that young fellow who shows up is clearly trying to do a little bit of, I guess you could call it pro-work. I hesitate to use the word leftist because left and right means almost nothing in China, at least in the way we use the words, but he's trying to do some pro-worker activism. He seems inclined to make it about something bigger, but Yonglian is not in the right state of mind for that. So it's a passing note in the story, but it made me pick up, or it fed into my interpretation there at the end that it is a story about what life for the bottom one part of the working class in modern China, what it looks like for them. Maybe not very directly, because the mothers aren't really the ones out there doing the real grinding work. It seems like the young man has been on the receiving end of unregulated industry that has killed him, if we don't think the curse killed him. My first reading, I was much more inclined to think, oh, it's the curse is in some way real. It is a story about the supernatural. But on my second reading, I almost wasn't thinking about the curse. I don't know, it's just how it went for me second time around.
There's one other aspect that struck me as a theme that could have both a supernatural and a realistic critique of rural society interpretation. These people are who are left behind in the village are thinking of the departed. There are the people who departed through death. That would be I guess the husband of Zhong Yunglian. She calls out his name. I forget whether he's dead or not, but anyway, he's not there when she is having the struggle with her nemesis. And both women, of course, are thinking of their sons who are not dead, but they're down south in Guangdong. One is in Dongguan, and they're both a means of reasserting their position in the village. Zhong Yunglian keeps trying to contact her son, but can't through telephone calls and stuff. So there's this theme of being isolated in the village, away from your kith and kin, and that links up perhaps to certain supernatural ideas that people want comfort from the dead and departed, as well as those who've departed for work. Anyway, the family is broken up, and on the other hand, it's a very real aspect of the hollowing out of rural China, as Ai and Oning and others see it, as everybody would, I think.
Yeah, and we don't get the impression that the village is a particularly great place to live while we're there. There's a moment that made me blink twice where Yonglian wants to make a phone call, so she has to go to the designated village phone, the guy that manages it. And this story's not set in the distant past. This is, I guess, Ai would know, this is a real phenomenon.
I remember those days in Shanghai in the 1980s.
Gosh. When
you had to walk a block, perhaps, even if you're real proletarians, di-di-da-da, wutan jieji, you had to walk a block to take a bath in a bathhouse.
Right.
And you cooked outside on a little brazier. Yeah. China has changed rapidly in the urban areas.
Right. Yeah. So time's moving at different speeds in different places. If we're measuring time by technology and development, that is.
Right.
Yeah. I realize I had a whole set of questions for interpreting the story, and we have danced on just about all of them. So it's hard for me to single out one to throw directly at you. I'll ask this one. I haven't asked this one yet. So we've been talking all high-minded supernatural stuff. How about a more mundane question? Are there any likable characters in the story for you?
I think we pity them more than we like them, right? Yeah. I didn't find anybody I really cottoned to. At the end, the fact that the two women who have been subject to petty revenge sort of things, and maybe it could have developed into a feud, come together. So to that extent, they're both kind of admirable. But I didn't see anything likable in society or in individual personalities. I don't know. Did you feel differently?
Yeah, I think the moment where they, I was going to say become friends, that might be overstating it, but there's some kind of a solidarity or a mutual understanding or some peace between the two of them. That's a moment where I liked both the characters. But prior to that, no one does anything very sweet or cuddly, I guess, except when Yonglian's son turns up. She immediately, it's what she's been craving because he's been so distant, and she immediately goes into, I guess, mommy mode and cooks for him and stuff. So that's, I guess, just basic kind behavior. But yeah, none of these people are people I'd want to spend time with. I think I don't think it would be very fun, and I don't think we'd have much to talk about, even if we did transcend the language barrier.
I think a low point in human relations is when the woman who delivers the curse becomes very jealous when the successful or evidently successful son of her rival comes back. So she goes to the police and files a little report about him, saying that he absconded after you busted his gambling project. Therefore, he didn't have to pay up his fines, and nobody else in town did either. Also, he brought back a so-called prostitute, which may or may not be true. So yeah, she's informing on a neighbor. That's not very nice, and using the police to do it.
Yeah, and right from the start, she's really quite unpleasant because the minute her chicken is gone, her first assumption is that her neighbor's taken it, and she has no evidence for that. It's just her gut, and I guess we can see she's not all that smart because she immediately just trusts her gut and gets very what's the word? Very, very aggressive very quickly. She goes all in on something that gives us zero evidence. And there's a bit that's almost, it's pretty comical. I'm just trying to find it. Yeah, so there's this paragraph that just made me go like, oh my goodness. It goes like this. Whenever the two women encountered each other, Zhong would strive to match her antagonist's look of contempt. She stretched some sheet plastic over the fence around the chicken coop to prevent the birds from flying away, and asked her son-in-law to write "Death to Thieves" on the strip of red cloth wrapped around every chicken's leg. So it's this amazing mental image of all these chickens walking around with a death threat tied to their leg. Just crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and
she's
Faith is very much concerned. Once the chicken does return on its own because it hasn't been stolen, she has to kill it and eat it.
Yeah,
just to save face. Yeah.
So it takes the death of her son to own up to it, it seems. What I wanted to ask a follow-up question to this one. What did you think about the things motivating the characters? Like I guess we talked about what drove Zhong Liang crazy, but just in general, what's driving these people? Because like, I guess when Guo Feng, our protagonist's son, shows up, we're told episodes of like his ventures out into the working world. And I think there's one story where like he borrows a van, he drives the van out of town, or is it his friend? One of the young men anyway, borrows a van, drives the van out of town, calls, and they've just lost the van. And it's very sort of, that totally reminded me of The Stranger, where it's like, I've done something stupid. Why did you do it? I don't know. I've done something completely incompetent and useless. Why are you so incompetent? I don't know. It's really absurd to me in the existential sense.
Of course, as a critic, you could also ask, why did he put that detail in the story? I mean, it shows a certain insouciance on the part of the negligent son and so forth. They gamble, and they're not really upstanding people, but on the other hand, you have to sympathize with them in the straits that they're in.
Yeah, I'm sure it must be a debate in sort of left-leaning or left-leaning realism, because realism as a genre I guess definitely in cinema, in British cinema, it is essentially a socialist genre, and there's often, I guess, realism as a literary genre outdates a lot of those political concerns. But as far as I'm aware, it tends to be a genre that has its sympathies with the downtrodden, who are on the sort of the receiving end of all the unfortunate, the hard end of life. Because if you've got lots of money, you can cushion yourself from the real world. Yeah. I certainly do. Well, I have enough money to do some of that. Here I am in a house. That's one example. But yeah, if you're living day to day, then you are going to be more subject to the problem of needing to eat, needing heat, needing a roof over your head. So yeah, where was I going with that? Yes, so the debate, if you are some idealistic left-leaning person who wants to do something with your creative works to help the least well-off people, do you follow your creed of realism and be absolutely honest about all the behavior you see, which often might not be that great, because if you are living a deprived life, you might end up a somewhat deprived person. Like, social problems go where the poverty is. Do you do that, or do you take the more sort of Soviet or Maoist approach and write marvelous fables where the downtrodden are the good guys and do nothing wrong? And it's pretty clear to see that this story is pretty much exclusively in that first camp I mentioned, although the hill I die on is that at the end we get something a bit more symbolic that doesn't paint an absolutely heroic picture of the two women, but paints a kind of bittersweet, beautiful picture of them. And I guess that if I'm trying to think of like classic British social realist films, some of them do go for the bittersweet. Like there's the one that springs to mind is Kes, the one about the boy in the kestrel. Don't know if you've heard of that one.
No, I don't think I know that one.
It's about a working class lad. I think he's in somewhere in the north of England. A lot of the early ones are all in the north of England. And he adopts a pet kestrel and has a very sort of touching relationship with it. But he has, I forget if it's a big brother or a dad who's sort of no nonsense type, who eventually just kills Kes the kestrel. So sort of classic bittersweet, well beloved piece of cinema. I've not seen it, by the way, so I'm really talking at my ass. But yeah, like, seems to me the bittersweet is a nice way to sort of have your cake and eat it.
Yeah, these people are not near starvation or anything. They have chickens. They have access to a truck. It's basically technology that keeps them from having the telephones. Although there are cell phones afoot, makes you wonder about cell towers. Do they have cell towers there? I guess.
I certainly found living in China on a Chinese SIM card, I never lacked for signal. Whereas here in the UK, I'm often, if I'm in the wrong spot, I've got no signal. I didn't remember seeing many of the cell towers, and I also wasn't far out in the countryside that often. But I remember noticing the signal was generally better than it is here in the UK. Yeah.
Well, technological progress in even the small cities has been rapid. I remember in 1980, Fenghuang in West Hunan, there at one intersection in town, there was a 20-watt light bulb that helped people see their way. Come back in 2002 or 2003, they have the equivalent of McDonald's and stuff like that. Things have changed very rapidly.
Yeah, I guess that it's fair to point out that, I mean, the presence of chickens in the story, that's the giveaway. These people aren't wanting for food. They're in the hierarchy of needs, those really foundational needs have been met. It's I guess education is probably one of the big ones that's missing. And also maybe something to do with their lives, because I feel like no one really, maybe Yong Mien's two problems are her son's not around and she's not happy about that. And she's got nothing to do except, spy on her neighbor and become resentful. Maybe if she'd had scope for a hobby or travel or something, then she wouldn't have tied the word death to thieves to the legs of all of her chickens.
Yeah.
I think I'll ask another one of my ready-made questions. Do you think the story gives us an insight into Ai Yi's worldview as a writer or as a person, if we can even claim to know such a thing?
I don't, well, no. I really am kind of bewildered. I don't know what his worldview is. I know he is an explorer. He likes to explore different literary styles. He reads everything, all sorts of genres, mostly avant-garde. I don't know of any worldview that I can really put, especially these stories in Two Lives. They don't connect up. Would you like to hear a plot summary of another strange one for Two Lives?
Absolutely. So this is this recently published collection of short stories, right?
Yeah. Zhou Lingtong, in a mountain town, tries to commit suicide after failing college entrance exams for the 8th time, but he is stopped from walking into a river, as happens in another story. He goes up a mountain and asks a monk if he can be an acolyte, but the monk refuses. Then the young man, Zhou, rapes a young woman after she calls him a psycho. He steals her bike and flees. Then he goes across the Yangtze, becomes a beggar. He saves a woman from being beaten by a group of men. She gives him a slip of paper with her telephone number in Beijing. A police search party arrives. He escapes. He travels around as a beggar, ends up in Suzhou, is seized by a local cop, but then he calls the phone number of that woman in Beijing whom he rescued. She comes, cleans him up, gets him a job in her dad's company in Beijing. The boy is given a company to run in Malaysia. 8 years later, people from his town arrive, but not to arrest him. They say that the rape charge was bogus, there is no evidence. Zhou Lingtong goes home, presumably to Jiangxi. His parents are dead, but the townsfolk receive him as a celebrity. He's a rich man now. He goes back to the local Buddhist temple. The monk there is now a different monk. The old monk, whom Zhou Lingtong met 8 or 10 years ago, blamed the new monk for coming and making him starve to death because there wasn't enough food for both of them. End of story. So it's sort of a concatenation of unlikely events, all very unfeeling in a very cold, cold world, I would say.
Yeah.
Sometimes phraseology is strange, almost dreamlike. But if you think the curse is weird, you should read these works in 2 lives. The others that are even stranger. There is, in fact, one in the attic about body parts in a trunk, a footlocker.
Yikes.
So yeah, it's interesting. It's obviously these are crime cases with strange, aberrant psychological aspects that have come together, but exactly what the logic of the story is sometimes unclear to me. So I'll really be looking forward to this new one from Nikki Harmon, Wake Me Up at 9 a.m.
Is that one she's doing a novel, or is it another collection?
I think it's a novel.
Right. Okay, yeah, that would be great, because that'll be the second ever IE novel in English translation.
All of her works are good. I also look forward to reading Broken Wings, the Jia Pinghua thing about Guai Mai, I presume it's the kidnapping and sale of women and children and so forth. Have you read that? I haven't had time for you.
It's on my shelf. I haven't read it yet. My girlfriend has read it, funnily enough. But yeah, that one is from the perspective of the kidnapped woman, who's called Butterfly in Nikki's translation.
Yeah.
And she's taken out to rural Shanxi, Jia's home province. While you were describing that IE story, before he got rich, I was thinking of a non-fiction book I read. I guess this one might be in your wheelhouse. The Corpse Walker by Liao Yiwu. Do you know that one?
No. Again, who's the author? Liao Yiwu?
Yeah.
I think I've maybe heard, but I don't really know it. No, I don't know.
All right. It's really interesting. It's very IE-esque, I think, or maybe even Oning-esque, because it's this guy, he, as a project, I believe, he was interviewing people who were like basically outside of mainstream Chinese society, who were sort of, I think it has a subtitle that sort of says it very directly. Let me just Google very quickly. The Corpse Walker by Liao Yiwu. It's an interestingly formed title. It has 2 colons. The Corpse Walker, real life stories, China from the bottom up. So he's speaking to people who are right at the bottom, but many of them have they're living as musical performers turned beggars. There's a Falun Gong practitioner. There's a human trafficker. There's a public toilet manager. There's a professional mourner, so someone you can pay to show up to your family member's funeral and cry for you. There's a leper. He found a leper, a grave robber, and he talks to them all kind of respectfully, quite frankly. There's one really funny one where he does get a bit abrasive with the guy. It's a man. It feels like an absurd short story and set in the countryside. It's a man who, I think he took over a town and set up base in the town hospital. He appointed himself an emperor and declared his county a new kingdom and demanded that, I don't know, the prefectural level government or the national government let them secede. And I think he did get away with it for a while before, sufficiently armed policemen could show up to shut him down. And yeah, he was in prison, but still would refer to him, if I remember right, would still refer to himself in the third person as the so-and-so emperor, and kept this up while Liao was trying to interview him. And I think it's very subtle, but you can see in the way the questions that Liao is getting annoyed at this guy. But also, but most of the chapters are not that funny. But what they all have in common is that they're quite invisible, with the exception of this emperor. They're all quite invisible people. And you definitely see that in The Perfect Crime, that for a lot of that story, the main character is able to drift around unseen because although he goes from hotel to hotel, he's able to find ones where you don't need ID. And I guess he never travels by rail. For rail in China, you need ID. But if you're going through dodgy hotels and if you're traveling by bus or by bike or something, then I think you can stay more or less invisible, especially if you're out of the city, away from the CCTV. And it's an interesting thought for this very controlled country. There is, not an underbelly, but an underworld sounds too dark. There is like detritus that blows in the wind that could go through a very strange life, like that guy in that IE story, or like these real people. And that does feel like a really interesting seam for both realist and weird, strange writing to sort of mine for stories.
Now, these characters sound very lumpen proletariat.
There you go. There's the word I was looking for.
One thing I didn't mention when we were talking about the current scene of crime literature in China today, ghost and supernatural themes and horror themes do enter them somewhat. I've only read one book in translation by Cai Jin, who combines these things. He has an interview also, if you want to look at him, at this EU China 2020 Lit Fest thing.
All right.
He's on screen on YouTube. You can listen to him, but he's combined some of these themes. Again, it's an unexplored territory.
Was that The Child's Past Life that you read?
Yes. Child's Past Life.
I've read that. I loved that book, and I'm really hoping to do it on the show, but I didn't know who else had read it, and God damn it, the one guy I could have got, I just used him. I will, if anyone listening would like to talk about a horror book Chinese horror book in translation, I'm extremely game for that. But yeah, that you're right, that one does have crime and thriller elements, especially, and a mystery that needs to be solved as well. I guess the mystery's there from the start, but it does go more into like crime and thriller and stuff being done in secret as it progresses. But yeah, I really like that book, but maybe because it's set in a lot of parts of Shanghai that I used to frequent, the Suzhou Creek. We've been going for an hour, 20 minutes. I think I've kind of gone everywhere I wanted to go with questions about the story. Maybe there's one more I could do. I don't know. We talked. I've certainly brought up socialism, social realism, socialist realism a few times. We've talked about class quite a lot, but I just wonder if you've got any thoughts about that. How in an ostensibly socialist or communist, whatever you want to call it, country, there is a huge class inequality, and this story is about, I guess, the big equality, right, is the urban and the rural, and this story is about the rural people. So as a reader or as an academic, does that stand out to you, or do you have ways of thinking about that?
Well, of course, it's important. One of the themes is whether or not the sons send money back to the village, which is an important thing. Or I guess once upon a time, factory girls would come back and open up little shops and so forth. I don't know that a shop would survive here, but yeah, there is a class element. You always wonder in these stories about the countryside whether or not there's a certain condescension or patronizing attitude by these urbanized writers. When I first read The Curse, in fact, I thought of a work by Lee Ray, which I was asked to translate by Helen Cho, an anthropologist at Yale, who wrote a book called Furrows that assembled some short stories about, I guess, they would be mostly 1980s writers looking at the countryside. And the story I translated there by Lee Ray was electing a thief, Xuanzhe, where they had an election to decide who had stolen something, and it was kind of an interpretation of country folks' incomprehension of democracy. People were being told to implement democracy. So why don't we have an election to decide who the thief is? And of course, select somebody who's unpopular. And of course, if you look at these things in retrospect, then you wonder if there's a kind of patronizing turn. But Lee Ray, of course, is a great writer, and more so than I think his facts are more to the point. Just leaves you guessing. So, yeah, it's interesting to think about how cops would fit into this. I think of them as mostly lower middle class. They're viewed as brutes and bullies by most people, uneducated within urban China. And it's interesting that here in the countryside, you find people talking back to the cops. Right? They're not afraid of them. I don't know why.
Yeah, I think it's not the most subtle thing in the story, but one of these cops, one of the meaner ones, has a Stalin mustache. That's pretty to the point. And yeah, there's a scene where we have a scuffle, where the villagers are fighting the police. There's a book I read, a volume, an academic volume called Chuang. I think I brought it up much earlier on in the show's history, which is all about sort of it's a what would you call it? Slightly anarcho communist critique of just the economics of the PRC, and that volume 1, I think, takes you through the 50s through to 21st century, broad strokes from what I remember, just talking about how exploitation has changed shape but not really gone away. But I think one thing it does tell you is that there are government stats on the number of protests and incidents that occur, and it's pretty huge. I guess that you don't hear about them so much because they're small, they're localized, they tend to be about specific issues, but often I guess as well they're way out there in the countryside.
On the order of 100,000 a year, right?
Right.
I don't know what's happened lately under COVID and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think the book said the government doesn't view these as a crisis or anything, and is often able to address them rather than suppress them. So I don't know, I guess I'd just mention that for any readers who are reading this story and are shocked that IE can depict some villagers scuffling with local police, I don't think I suppose it might be a little bit of a risky thing to write about, but it's not something that is completely like, what would I say, like a gunpowder keg incident. It's nothing like Tiananmen 1989. It's, I guess, a feature of possibly some kind of a feature of life for maybe not. It's maybe not every day, but it's not some shocking, huge thing if it's a minor scuffle.
Well, in this story, the Wus are connected up at the provincial level, according to the one version of the story. So that
right, and that did get taken out.
Throw their weight around. It's interesting that when the riot begins to germinate, the police, including the IE figure, abscond.
Right.
They flee.
Yeah.
Kind of like in a recent city in Texas.
Right. I think that's all my formal questions about the story. I probably should move us on to the miscellaneous section now, so that we're not talking all night. Or, well, it's night here at my end.
That's right.
You probably could go for hours if you wished, but I'm going to have to go to bed at some point. So first miscellaneous question, would you like to suggest a Chinese word of the day that sort of captures the essence of the story?
For IE's plots in general, dissociated. This is a term from psychology that I don't really understand. In Chinese, they keep talking about noir and, which I guess in Chinese is heian. But I've never understood the word noir in English, if you can call that French word English. But unmotivated. It reminded me a little bit of the early avant-garde works of Yu Hua in the 1980s. If you've ever gone back and read those, Xianshi Yizhong, another kind of reality, is a story named after 1986. One sentence doesn't necessarily follow the logic or have any particular connection to the sentence in front of it. This was sort of my impression of some of the plotting in some of the stories, not so much this one, but inexplicable. unmotivated, inexplicable. There's no way of putting it all together. It's almost random. So I guess that would be my dissociated in a psychological sense. And IE is interested in psychology and abnormal psychology, definitely, as a motivation for crimes. I think he once said that most crimes are accidental, which would really mean then unmotivated, but would come perhaps from, if not circumstance, then carelessness, or just letting your emotions run. I don't really understand the thinking there, but it does probably link up with the philosophy of existentialism, that you live in the moment, and what comes later is not necessarily determined by what happened in the past.
Yeah, and we don't understand our drives. We don't have a little screen that shows us our unconscious, or we don't have a little app on our phone that shows us how much adrenaline is running through our biological system any given time. And yeah, if someone annoys me, I guess you see it in TV shows a lot. Someone pushes someone out of anger, and then that person lands the wrong way, and then their life's over, and that person has just become a killer. I mean, I'm sure that's the description of a lot of manslaughters that happen. Just completely absurd things that needn't have happened. I read a thing just in a Facebook comment thread recently that it was on stats about suicides. Sorry to take things in a dark direction, but according to this one Facebook commenter, who perhaps isn't the most reliable source to quote, but this one Facebook commenter who said they knew what they were talking about, said that in most cases, suicides are not the result of long, drawn out plans or ideations. They tend to be the result of ideations that began 5, 10, 15 minutes ago. They're very rapid series of a rapid decline into the sort of fatal action. And yeah, I guess it's all the more tragic, because had that person not fallen into that one state of mind, given another half hour, that state of mind would be gone. And I don't know, if I think of a time when I become very angry, all the world's gone black, and then an hour later, I can't even understand how I could have got into that headspace. And I think that, yeah, it points to for me, existentialism, it's a lot like a lot of kinds of philosophy. It's about doing away with your illusions. And in existentialism, it's often comforting illusions that you need to do away with, but the idea is to come out the other end more, I don't know, not a nihilist, but more sure that even despite all the things set against you, you at least now understand them, and you can face them and do something about it. Since it's a Chinese word of the day, what's the best translation for disassociated?
I looked it up actually. The jiali or jiali, something like that. There is a Chinese term for it.
Jia. Okay. Let me just hang on.
Yeah, jiali is what they come up with.
Right. Okay, I'll pop that in my notes. Lovely. So disassociated, jiali, to make it the adjective.
Yeah.
Now the next one, I guess the story kind of answers this question for us.
Here it gets yóulí, yo as in to journey, yóulí.
Oh,
that's
okay.
Dissociate.
Okay.
Jiali, right. I think is the psychological term.
Right. Okay. So our word of the day, I'll put to disassociate, and hopefully I remember what the right yo looks like.
Yeah, 水字旁，三点水.
Yo. Oh yeah, it's got the sandian shui, so that I'm pretty sure that's the right one.
Yeah.
It's the same yo from Lu Yo holiday, right?
Right.
Okay, great. Now the next question, I think the story basically answers this one for us. So pressure's off if you want to use the song in the story, but if you could pick any piece of music to pair the curse with, what would it be?
I knew from some of your previous podcasts that this would come up. A very strange idea came to me last night, because IE wrote a story or a novel collection, a story collection called Niao, Kanjenwala, the bird saw me,
Right.
which somehow stuck in my mind. And so then I began to think of Edith Piaf, the little
Okay.
sparrow, and La Mon Piaf or something in French. And so I was thinking of that. And then I think, well, maybe, non, je ne regrette rien. I'm not sorry about anything. I guess that's sort of like the fellow who narrates A Perfect Crime.
Ni le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. C'est payé.
I'm not sorry for anything I did. Whatever you can figure there. But that would be a very existentialist thing. Probably good that comes from France.
Yeah, the home of existentialism. So we'll go with that one. Non, je ne regrette rien. I think we might. I will have to check this. We might have had that on another episode, but
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure though. I'm
People like her.
yeah. That's for me. Being a millennial, that's just not just, but first thing that I think of when I think of that song is the film Inception, because it makes well, it's key to the plot actually, that song. So
yeah,
I knew what it sounded like long before I actually knew the name.
Well, something punk or grunge or something like that would probably be more appropriate, but that's beyond me. I began my musical consciousness when I sat down with my parents for the new TV thing, Your Hit Parade. So probably didn't have, I don't know. These are sort of the crooners generation. So they didn't like Elvis, so I didn't like Elvis.
I used to listen to tapes actually, as well as CDs of an old British comedy radio show called The Goons that had Spike Milligan, Peter Sellers, and Harry Seacombe. And they would, a big part of the show, definitely every episode, at least once, often several times, they would be parodying or mocking the other radio shows of the time. So they would say, if they wanted to mock some contemporary music, they'd say, and now here's what's on the hit parade. And as like a 10-year-old boy, the hit parade, what is that? And then I realized, oh, it's just the hits. It's the top 20, but that's where I guess the hits is just the contracted form of the hit parade.
Yeah, the authors of the singers of the 50s, Dorothy Collins, Snooky Lanson, Giselle McKenzie, not all of which my parents liked, I have to admit. And I will give credit to my father. He always thought that Frank Sinatra should have retired much earlier. So they did have some taste.
Okay, excellent. I realized for my next, I need to do my musical pick before I start getting onto the bonus question. Right, so I did pick something a little bit more punky, although the song itself is probably more grungy than punky. So the band is Converge. They are as if you could call them one thing, a hardcore punk band, except extremely. They have pushed the label early in their career. They pushed the label as far as they could go with like how fast, how aggressive, and how ruthless can it be without with keeping the cartoony thing to a minimum. They're a little bit more adult than some of the other bands in the genre. They tend to get acclaim. They've done a collaboration album with musician Chelsea Wolfe that's getting them into like newspapers like The Guardian. So it's a highbrow choice I've gone for here. But the song of theirs, it's from a later album. I think, to be honest, a lot of their albums I can't really listen to, but I bought one called Axe to Fall, which has some very short, very fast tracks, but then a couple of longer, slow ones. And this is one of the longer, slow ones. And there's an amazing fan-made music video for it, stitched together from a few films with sort of surreal, put it like this, it's the only time I've seen satanic imagery in metal music video not look stupid. It's actually very powerful and weird. The song is called Wretched World, and it's basically just, it's not describing a fantasy world, it's just describing everything wretched and sad and heartbreaking about our own world, but in a sort of a drudging dirge sort of a fashion. And it's like mournful. It's got a strange, the blackest version of bittersweet you could imagine. Like the one solace you have in the wretched world is that you're going through it with everyone else. And yeah, I think it would work if you were making a film of this story, especially the quieter parts, because it does build at points. But yeah, that's what I'd pick. I'll have popped a little 30 seconds of each of these tracks for the listeners, so they can listen to a beautiful French voice, and then they can endure 30 seconds of depression from Converge. Now, my next one, it's a bonus question for Patreon. I actually forgot to write this one, so I'll have to think of it off the cuff right now. Let me see. Okay, here's one. If you could set IE into writing either a fiction or non-fiction book about a real world criminal, could be a serial killer, could be someone else, who would you commission him to write about? I guess I'll close the bonus question there. I think that'll do nicely. I'll take us to our final questions. So I think we've kind of answered this one through our conversation, but if our listeners want more like The Curse, where could we point them?
Well, other books by IE are being translated. One will come out soon. Two Lives, it takes lots of patience to go through. You have to read each story twice to really figure out what's going on. And that has just been out for a couple of years. Chinese literature, other than ones we've mentioned, like The Untouched Crime and so forth. I'm trying to think. Cai Jun's. For corruption, Murong Xuecun. Book, what is it? The novel about red dust.
Dancing Through Red Dust.
Dancing Through Red Dust. Yes, that was entertaining. It was a bit wearying because it went on. It's kind of reminded me of a late Qing muckraking, or Hei An, or Hei Mu, one crime after another, countenanced or actually created by lawyers and judges conspiring with each other, setting people up. That's sort of a run-on novel. I don't think it was published by a major publisher, but that might be more interesting for people who are interested in corruption than In the Name of the People, if that is available even in English. I don't know.
I can recommend one very good book all about corruption, and it's called Corruption and Realism in Late Socialist China, The Return of the Political Novel. So yeah, I had to Google it to remind myself of the name, but yeah, that's Jeffrey's own book on exactly the topic. It's, I guess if you have academic access, that might be the best way to get it, because it's from an academic press. But I honestly really enjoyed reading that one. It was, like I said,
the advantages of being in small office.
Yeah.
Wang Xiaofang, The Civil Servant's Notebook, translated by someone from that wonderful organization, Paper Republic, Eric Abrahamson.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
We discussed it once in an email, and I think even he doesn't recommend it. I think one of the chapters is narrated by the chair in which the corrupt officials pigu, what do they call it? Ars?
But
or os in in English.
What would I call it? In Scottish, I'll give you the Scottish. Airs.
Airs, okay.
Airs literature, wonderful.
That takes patience to go through, but I appreciate him.
The civil servants.
Undertaken it. Eric Abrahamson, I think he, according to one report, recommended to the Chinese government that the delegation of writers who would come in 2015 to the Book Expo America thing there was a group. He himself gave a talk. I'm sorry I didn't listen to it, but that's where I got to meet Ai. There were lots of associated things going on, and it was a really good group of authors. Ai was one of them. Bi Fei Yu, Liu Zhenyun, Su Tong. Very few women writers. Shen Keyi was supposed to come, but she couldn't come. I think she had written some things that got her in trouble. Fang Fang, I guess not the Fang Fang who's famous now. Right? No, Lan Lan, I think, a poet came. And there was simultaneously, the International Pen had what would we call it? A protest featuring Jonathan Franzen, and Moon Xuecun, I think, was there somehow.
Yeah, I think I've heard about this one.
Yeah, it was a big chance for China to come onto the scene, but they really blew it. They had enormous, I think it was 250,000 square feet of exhibition space. It was mostly Japanese war crimes against China, Xi Jinping biographies, and lots of children's books, not children's literature like Helen Wong has introduced us to, but primers, language books for the overseas Chinese market. And it was just it was not. There was an entrance fee, and it was all spread out over 5 days. So it was quite a disappointing thing. But there were lots of meetings on the side where, as at the China Institute, where we got to see some people. And I guess Eric can claim some credit for the relatively good authors that were chosen.
Yeah,
I think he was one.
It reminds me a bit of, again, a very early episode of the show where I recounted my experience at the London Book Fair, where I just shamelessly tried to find as many Chinese things as I could. And yeah, I had a few really quite nice conversations with some of the people at the stands, but glancing around the shelves, looking at what books they had there for people to look at, yeah, it wasn't very impressive. The kids' stories were some of the more interesting ones because they at least were stories. Everything else was sort of, I think, like foreign languages press translations of various classics, then lots of very sort of Communist Party self-history sort of stuff. Just, nothing that was really going to grab anyone. And I think that the event you're describing, I met Murong Xuecun once in London, and I think he talked about a few different things that would definitely be in his avenue, sort of being a disappointed dissident sort of things. And I think he did maybe mention that one, that it was a unimpressive handling of a great opportunity. But it's nice to know that you said there that there were at least some interesting authors. There were some
good authors. Liu Cixin supposedly was going to have a science fiction session. I'm not sure whether, not at this organization, but on the side. There were so many different events on the side, and there seemed to be a Chinese A list and a B list that I could never figure out. And but Liu Cixin was, I think, just about simultaneously going to be there for the Nebula Science Fiction Awards in Chicago that year. He had got an award the year before, and I guess was showing up a year afterwards, to make an entrance. I don't know whether he ever made it to New York or any of these things or not.
You can read about at least one of his visits to New York. There's a quite wonderful article. I'll send you the link. I think I forget if it's the New Yorker or the New York Times, but it's by oh, that's terrible. Why have I forgotten? I follow this. It's like the one journalist I follow on Instagram. Hang on a second. I'll just look it up. It's called Liu Cixin's War of the Worlds. Jiayang Fan, I think she's called. Yeah, it's the New Yorker by Jiayang Fan, and she's a Chinese American journalist. And when he was on one of his visits to the States, he was in New York. He was there to collect a prize. And she, I guess, followed him around for a day or two. They chatted about stuff. She noted lots of his observations about bits and bobs. And it's a very fun read. It's an interesting portrait of the guy and his trip. But yeah, I realize we're venturing off the track again. So on to the last question, which is, what are you reading just now?
Well, right now, frankly, I'm reading my own prose prior to getting it copy edited for the
Right.
University of Hawaii Press. My book that I introduced there leads on detective novels set in China, but not made in China. So no, I have a whole lot of books here that I have to read.
Oh my goodness.
My wife has recommended a novel by Russell Banks, which I started reading. I start reading things and then get distracted by somebody recommends something else. I'm right afterwards. I'm going to read something by a Singaporean writer, Kirsten Chun or Chin. I don't know how she pronounces it. CHEN, called Counterfeit, which sounds like it might have some crime aspects to it. Another book that I want to get back to, can't remember the author. It's a big book translated from a Middle Eastern language, I suppose Arabic. The Book of Impostures. Book of Imposture. That was a really interesting book. It was a really creative translation, as well as lots of footnotes for the academics, and lots of good things to read that I just felt. It's too bad I'm a very slow reader.
Yeah, I'm an okay reader, but my problem is sitting down and finding the time. And when I do have the time, not just grabbing my phone and scrolling, I think that is a problem for me. What I am reading just now, though, is, well, it's a big book, so progress is sort of by its nature slow. I'm reading, it's one of the authors is a guy that we both met in Leeds. It was Chen Fan. It's his joint book with Kai-Fu Lee, 2041, AI 2041. So probably a lot of listeners already know that, but the format of that one is Kai-Fu writes you a very brief intro to a sci-fi short story that Chen Fan has written, and they all are sort of thought exercises of something AI could be doing in 2041. They actually give a number. They say that the technology's chance, the tech in the story has an 80% chance of being a reality by 2041 when all the stories are set. And by the end of the story, Kai-Fu Lee, who is he's a man who works in business, really. I believe he's from Taiwan, but he's worked for a long time in Beijing in the world of AI and tech. Yeah, after Chen Fan's story, Kai-Fu will write an essay that sort of analyzes the technology, talks about it, explains it, and then goes into the technical problems, some of the moral quandaries. And it's a very interesting book. It is weirdly similar to stuff I look at in my job right now. I'm in an industry magazine for the pharmaceutical industry. And being in an industry magazine, people I interview, people who write in essays, are not out to tear the whole business to the ground. And so they don't write critically about the industry very often, and they use a weird sort of business language. They have all this vocabulary that I don't see anywhere else, like the word revolution as a verb, revolutionize. Is it? Yeah, revolutionize. That's all over the place. So it's weird. It feels weirdly similar to being at work, because Kai-Fu he does sort of pay lip service to the problems and the implications and the critiques, but really it's a book about AI by a guy who loves AI. And without Kyofan's stories, I don't think I'd get through it. But they bring, I mean, it's not quite this simple. It's more of a yin and yang thing, but really it's the story shows you the problems, and the essay gives you the problems versus the potential benefits of the technology. So it might be disappointing for some who are looking for a more conventional sort of sci-fi dystopia. It's a bit more level-headed than that. The stories are less strange and weird than other Chofan stories I've read. They feel more like thought experiments than like something like Year of the Rat. But it's pretty different. Can definitely give it that. But that's what I'm reading.
Yeah, there's been all sorts of consideration. Ordinarily, we like privacy and human rights and things like that. I've seen some people, of course, like universal surveillance as a means of controlling crime. But now I've seen a certain backlash in the US. The idea is that China it's sort of a Cold War mentality. I don't know how you can get out of it, really. If China selects us as an adversary, China has a great advantage in AI because it has all this data, facial recognition, now voice prints, information collected in restaurants and stores and so forth, street scenes. So enormous amounts of data that can allow very discriminating algorithms. So how can North America and Europe catch up? Well, they've got to perfect their AI, or else they'll be left behind. You get into this, it's almost like a new thermonuclear race, right? You keep going further and further, but it becomes more and more anti-humane in a way. So I don't know how to resolve these kind of things.
Not funnily enough, Kai-Fu's other book is called AI Superpowers, and it is about the US and China. And I feel that, again, my job sort of mirrors this, not so much in US-China rivalry, because the pharmaceutical industry in China is not on a sort of Western country level in terms of its development, except in cell and gene therapy. There it is essentially not in a race, but on a par now with the US. But the thing my job does underline for me is that, the US really is, how can I say this? It's not just another Western country. It is this in pharma. That's where all the great big money and movers are, and the US's FDA is that. Well, I suppose Europe has its own regulation agency, but just it's an eye-opener to what a standard setter and leader so many things in the States are, and what a big deal that is if another country moves in as a peer or an equal. It completely changes things. Yeah.
Well, there's great concentration of power and money and institutional capture by the private sector of governmental organs in many cases. So you don't know what to say.
Yes. No need to say anything. I think it speaks for itself. Yeah. Okay. That is our lot. Is there anything we've not hit on that you'd like to mention just now?
I think I've exhausted my possibilities. Thank you very much, Angus. Hope we hear more about your pharmaceutical exploits sometime. But you certainly added a lot to Chinese literature studies.
Yeah, well, I have a degree in lit to help me. I don't have a degree in bioscience, but I am learning on the job. And I do actually have an article, it's an interview article. It's not written by me, but it is an interesting look at Chinese pharma. It's an interview with the guy called Hong Pan, who works for Lonza, which I think is certainly a Western company, who've been doing pharma operations in China since the 80s, or at least the early 90s, which is, so they've been there a long time. Their head of China operations is this guy, Hong Pan, so a Chinese guy. And I was hoping for some kind of interesting perspective rather than just like the guy talking about his own company. And he obliged. He even told us like a breakdown of like the 5 regions of the country, which are the different pharmaceutical hubs and what their specialities are. So one for the geography fans as well as the bioscience fans. And yeah, it's just fantastic for that. There's so many cities, so many provinces, you can combine them into all these different corridors and hubs. It's a cartographer's dream. But yeah, I will actually bring things to a close now. So Jeffrey Kinkley, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was just as fun as I hoped it would be.
Thank you, Angus. I enjoyed it too.
Well, we've reached the end of the episode now. We have survived the curse, I'm very glad to say. I thank you again, as is customary, to my amazing guest, Jeffrey Kinkley. I think I made it clear, but it's just fantastic to have him on after having met him IRL, what feels like so long ago. Now, I'll cut to the chase, or at least I'll try to cut to the chase, by telling you what you can do to support the show if you enjoy it. So if you'd like to sort of keep me going, give me some pocket money, then the best way to do that is by signing up to Patreon, and the reason that's the best option is because you get something in return. I have a steady stream of bonus episodes, generally just me kind of pouring out my solo thoughts on something I've just read or something I'm about to do an episode on. It goes up there in a little mini podcast, basically. They tend to be 15 minutes to up to 30 minutes, sometimes even over 30, veering towards 40. Just depends how much of a rant I feel like doing. Besides from that, you can give something one-off to the show via PayPal, buy me a coffee. All the links to that are under support, which you'll see in the show notes and on the Trichific website, which is well worth exploring, by the way. Trichific.podbean.com. Something I've not plugged for a while that I'll plug here is the Trichific map. I've been pretty consistent with adding locations to this map. It's like a custom Google map, so you can sort of look around China and indeed the rest of the world to see locations that are linked to the stories I've covered. I'm not really sure what I can do for this one because we've already put Ai's hometown, and this village that appears in the story isn't a specific location, so maybe I'll try and be clever this time around. But anyway, that is linked to in the show notes as well, so please do check out the Trisha Fig map because I'm awfully proud of it, you know. Now, the best thing you can do for the show, if you did not already know, is not financial. It does not involve browsing the stupid imaginary maps that people have made on the internet, but it's just to tell people. That is the best thing you can do. If you know someone who you think would enjoy the show, just tell them. So, tell your teacher, tell your dad, tell your wayward son, and tell that damn neighbour who's been stealing your chickens. Tell all the chicken thieves in the world to listen to this show, and hopefully it will set them right. And on that note, I will say, 再见.